My name is Claire Morgan, and I was 39 years old when I stood outside St. Augustine's Church in rural Connecticut, adjusting the black lace on my sleeve, dreading the moment my sister Melanie would arrive. It had been 6 years since I'd seen her, the woman who not only betrayed me but took the man I was supposed to marry. The moment her luxury black SUV rolled up the church's gravel path, time slowed. I hadn't seen her since the day she left with Ethan Caldwell, my then fiancé, a millionaire tech entrepreneur who I thought was my forever, the same man I had once dreamt of having children with. As Melanie stepped out in her designer coat and oversized sunglasses, that same smug, untouched smirk spread across her face like nothing had happened. She was still the woman who could wear betrayal like a tailored outfit. But what she didn't expect, what made her freeze mid-step, lips parting slightly, a chill washing over her carefully powdered face, was the man walking up behind me, my husband, and he was nothing like Ethan. Before I tell you how she reacted, how her entire body stiffened like someone had thrown ice water over her soul, let me take you back to how it all began. I was 32 when I met Ethan, a soft-spoken genius with the kind of wealth that made people lean in when he spoke. He had made his first million at 26 and was well on his way to building his second empire when we crossed paths at a charity art auction in New York. I was a gallery manager, ambitious but grounded, happy to be surrounded by creativity even if my salary barely covered my rent in Brooklyn. Ethan swept in with silent confidence and that rare charm that made people feel seen, like the room had paused just for you. I called my mom that night. "Mom," I said, trying to hold back the excitement in my voice, "I think I met someone who could change everything." My mother, Elaine Morgan, was the kind of woman who kept the family together with handwritten letters and perfectly timed voicemails. She lived in Connecticut in the house we grew up in. She was the anchor to my sailboat life. She adored Ethan, said he reminded her of my father when he was younger, clever, protective, and emotionally intelligent. We were engaged within 18 months. He proposed on a weekend trip to Napa Valley, just the two of us, with a ring so beautiful it made the world feel still. That's when Melanie reappeared. We hadn't been close in years. She was my younger sister by 2 years, but had always lived like she was 2 steps ahead. Fashion-forward, boyfriend-hopping, and addicted to attention. We had our childhood moments of bonding, but our 20s tore us apart. Melanie was the type of person who never really celebrated your success. She measured it against her own. Still, I let my mother talk me into making her my maid of honor. "She's your sister, Claire," Mom said while knitting baby booties for a friend's child, eyes hopeful. "Maybe this is the bridge we've been waiting to build." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. When I introduced Ethan to Melanie at our engagement dinner, she was almost too enthusiastic. Her compliments were endless, her laughter too loud, and I saw her hand rest on Ethan's shoulder just a beat too long. Still, I brushed it off. 'Cause love makes you do that. Looking back now, I can tell you the exact moment the first seed of doubt was planted. It was quiet, almost forgettable, like a light flickering once before going out completely. A few weeks after Melanie met Ethan, she began showing up more frequently, always under the pretense of helping me with the wedding. She lived an hour away in Jersey but acted like my Upper West Side apartment was suddenly her second home. She brought fabric swatches and Pinterest boards, offering unsolicited opinions on everything from floral arrangements to the wedding playlist. First, I was touched. I thought maybe she was really trying. Maybe Mom was right, maybe this was our bridge. But then things shifted subtly at first. Ethan started pulling away in small ways. He would check his phone during dinner, give distracted responses when I talked about honeymoon plans. When I mentioned it once, he simply said he was overwhelmed with the new app rollout. I believed him. After all, I'd fallen in love with his ambition. It made sense that he'd be consumed by it at times. Still, the air between us felt thinner, like there was less oxygen in the room whenever we were together. One night, I returned from a late meeting at the gallery to find Ethan and Melanie sitting on the living room couch. He was showing her something on his laptop, something about interface design. They both laughed at something I didn't understand, and Melanie looked up, startled, almost guilty when she saw me. I smiled politely and walked to the kitchen, trying not to let the unease settle too deeply in my chest. "You guys look cozy," I joked, pouring myself a glass of wine. Melanie stood abruptly, brushing non-existent crumbs off her jeans. "Oh, I was just leaving anyway. Just helping him brainstorm a few layout ideas." I nodded, sipping the wine even though it tasted sour. That night, Ethan barely touched me when we lay in bed. I told myself he was just tired. He kissed my temple and turned away. A week later, we were supposed to attend a cake tasting together, a task Ethan had insisted we do as a couple because he didn't want a boring wedding cake. But the morning of, he texted saying an investor meeting had popped up last minute. "Melanie can go with you," he wrote. "She knows my favorite flavors." I froze, staring at the text. "She knows your favorite flavors." I almost replied. Almost asked how and when she had learned that. But instead I typed back, "Sure. Thanks for letting me know." When I met Melanie at the bakery, she was wearing a dress I'd once complimented. Sleek and red, hugging her in all the right places. She talked incessantly during the tasting, taking photos of the cakes, texting someone during the breaks. She giggled at one point, then tucked her phone away quickly when she noticed me looking. "I was just texting Ethan about the strawberry almond one," she said lightly. "Of course," I murmured. That evening I cleaned out Ethan's car. We were hosting friends for dinner, and I wanted everything spotless. As I vacuumed the passenger seat, something caught my eye. Wedged between the seat and the center console was a silver earring. A dangling teardrop design with tiny opal insets. I recognized it immediately. It was part of a set Melanie had inherited from our grandmother. I held it in my hand, staring at it like it was an artifact from another life. When I confronted Ethan, he didn't flinch. "Oh yeah, that's Melanie's. I gave her a ride to her hair appointment last week. She said she lost it." "You didn't mention giving her a ride." "Didn't I?" He smiled too casually. "It was last minute." Later Melanie's story matched his word for word. And that's when the knot in my stomach turned into something else. Something colder. Something sharper. I began to unravel. I stopped sleeping. Food lost its taste. I'd stare at my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, lips chapped from stress, wondering how I had become this version of myself. Paranoid, distant, hollowed out. My friends noticed. My coworkers whispered. I started seeing a therapist in secret. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan suggested we postpone. "I'm worried about you," he said. "You're not yourself lately." I clung to him, sobbing, desperate. "Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me how to fix this." He just stroked my hair and said, "It's not you, Claire. I promise." But his eyes were empty. That night, I woke at 2:40 a.m. to find his side of the bed cold. I padded barefoot through the apartment and heard hushed voices from the guest room. "Not now," I heard Ethan whisper. "She'll hear us." "I know," came Melanie's voice. "But you promised." I stood frozen in the hallway, heart crashing against my ribs. The next morning I didn't say anything. Couldn't. I felt like a ghost in my own life. But something inside me snapped. I needed answers. So I showed up at Ethan's office unannounced. I brought his favorite sandwich, turkey and provolone with spicy mayo from the little deli on 9th Street. I told myself I was just being romantic. I told myself I was showing effort. His assistant looked startled. Mr. Caldwell's in a meeting." "I'll wait," I said, smiling. "I'm not sure that's... he said no interruptions." But I was already walking toward his office. I pushed the door open. What I saw is something I'll never forget. Something I'll carry in the quiet corners of my mind for the rest of my life. Ethan, my fiancé, pressed against his desk. And Melanie, my sister, straddling him, her arms around his neck. They didn't see me right away. They were so consumed in each other that I had a full 5 seconds to absorb the betrayal. The details were burned into my brain. Her blouse half unbuttoned. His hand gripping her thigh. Their mouths fused together like they'd done it 1,000 times. When they finally looked up, the color drained from both their faces. Ethan stepped forward, adjusting his tie like it was a business deal gone wrong. "This isn't what it looks like." "Don't," I said, voice steel-edged and shaking. "Don't insult me like that." Melanie didn't bother lying. "It just happened," she muttered. "How long?" Silence. "How long, Melanie?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Since the engagement party." My knees buckled slightly, but I stayed standing. "Get out," I told Ethan. "Claire, let's talk about this." "Get out." I walked away that day with my spine straight but my heart in ruins. I called my mom from the bathroom floor that night, unable to form full sentences. She and Dad drove down within hours. They let themselves in with the spare key. My mom sat on the bathroom tile, holding me like she used to when I was 8 and had nightmares. My father stood by the door, fists clenched, breathing like a bull. "I'll kill him," he muttered. "No, you won't," Mom said quietly. "But you'll help her get through this." And they did. In the weeks that followed, I canceled the wedding. My dad handled the vendors. My mom stayed with me, refusing to let me cry alone. When I returned the engagement ring, I gave it to the building doorman. I never wanted to see Ethan again. That was the end of that chapter, or so I thought. But what I didn't realize then was that life was about to give me something far better than Ethan ever could. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always come in loud sobs or nights of screaming into pillows. Sometimes it's quiet. It creeps in like fog, settling in your bones, making it hard to breathe, harder to smile. That was me in the months after Ethan and Melanie's betrayal. My world hadn't just collapsed, it had unraveled. And I was left holding scraps of what I thought was a perfect life. I moved out of the apartment Ethan and I had shared and went back to my childhood home in Connecticut. Just for a while, I told myself. Just until I could think clearly. My mother made tea every evening, the same way she had when I was a little girl. My father checked in more often than usual, bringing home boxes of pastries he pretended were leftover from the office. They were trying, in their quiet ways, to stitch my heart back together. I stopped checking social media. I couldn't bear to see if Melanie had posted anything. According to my mutual friends, she had moved in with Ethan. No official announcement. No photos. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams with guilt. One morning I stood in the backyard, barefoot in the dewy grass, watching the sunrise. That's when it hit me. I couldn't stay stuck in this moment forever. I had to get out of the shadow they cast over me. I needed something that was mine again. Purpose. Direction. So I went back to work. I returned to the art gallery in New York, but things had shifted. Had changed. The white walls and quiet exhibits that once brought me peace now made me feel disconnected. I loved art, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. One afternoon, while organizing a small community exhibit on emerging artists, I noticed a visitor wandering the gallery. Alone, curious, thoughtful. He was tall, in his early 40s maybe, dressed casually but carried himself with a kind of quiet confidence I hadn't seen in a while. He stopped in front of a large oil painting of a boy fishing in a storm, hands in his pockets, tilting his head as if trying to listen to the canvas. I approached slowly, trying not to interrupt his moment. "It's called Still Waters Lie," I offered. Painted by a local artist who said it was about learning to wait through chaos. He smiled, looking over at me. "It's beautiful." I didn't know chaos could look this still. His name was Daniel Hayes, a software engineer turned nonprofit founder. He ran an organization that brought art therapy to children recovering from trauma. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't charismatic in the way Ethan had been. But he was present. Genuinely, fully, uncomfortably present. The kind of person who looks you in the eye and actually hears your answer when he asks, "How are you?" We didn't become close overnight. Started with coffee, then lunch, then longer walks after work, conversations that stretched past closing hours and spilled into dinner. He never once pushed. He never once asked about Ethan or Melanie. He just showed up, with patience and kindness I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as we sat on a bench in Central Park, watching the boats drift across the water, Daniel turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "You talk like someone who's still bleeding from a wound no one can see." I looked down, blinking away the tears threatening to rise. That obvious, huh? He didn't offer advice. He didn't tell me to move on, or forget about it. He just said, "You don't have to pretend with me." And for the first time in months I didn't. I told him everything. The proposal, the betrayal, the earring in the car, the guest room whispers, the unbearable silence. I cried. Ugly, unfiltered sobs. And Daniel just sat there, letting me be broken without trying to fix me. After that, something shifted between us. He invited me to one of his non-profit events, a workshop for children using art to express things they couldn't say out loud. Watching those kids paint their fears, their hopes, their silent heartbreaks, it healed something in me. It reminded me that even when we're shattered, we're still capable of creating beauty. Daniel had a past too. A marriage that ended in quiet disappointment. A mother who had passed from ALS. A sister who he hadn't spoken to in years. He carried pain in a way that made space for mine. There was no competition, no comparison, just mutual understanding. 6 months later, I moved into his place in Brooklyn. It was nothing like the apartment I had shared with Ethan. There were mismatched mugs, books stacked on every surface, photos of children from his workshops taped to the fridge. It felt lived in, felt like home. One night, as we were brushing our teeth side by side, he handed me a small velvet box. "Not a proposal," he said quickly. "Not yet. Just something I wanted you to have." Inside was a simple gold bracelet, engraved with a single word. "Enough. Because you are," he said. "Just as you are." I cried harder than I did when Ethan proposed. Time passed. Seasons changed. My parents adored Daniel. My friends slowly started seeing me laugh again. I began helping Daniel with his nonprofit, coordinating events, curating art from local students, finding purpose in giving others a voice. Life didn't become perfect overnight. There were still days where I'd catch a whiff of a certain perfume or pass a bakery we'd once visited and feel that familiar pang. But the weight no longer held me down. I had learned to live beside it. 3 years after meeting Daniel, we got married in a quiet ceremony under a canopy of trees in the Hudson Valley. No grand gestures, no dramatic vows. Just honest promises, spoken through teary smiles and held hands. The morning of the wedding, I wrote a letter to my mother and left it at her favorite garden bench back home in Connecticut. I thanked her for teaching me what real love looks like. For reminding me that forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you, it's for your own peace. And for always being my safe place to land. I never sent Melanie an invitation. She and Ethan had faded from my life like bad dreams. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers, through mutual acquaintances or distant relatives. They had gotten married, then divorced. Ethan's company had tanked. Melanie had been spotted working at a luxury consignment store in Soho. I didn't search for updates. I didn't gloat. I simply chose not to let their names take up space in my new life. But fate has a way of circling back. 6 years after the betrayal, I got the call. My mother had passed. It was peaceful, my father said. In her sleep. No pain. Just stillness. The funeral would be held at St. Augustine's Church in our hometown. I flew in 2 days later, Daniel at my side. His arm around me like a lighthouse through the storm. My heart broke all over again. Losing my mother felt like losing the last thread to the version of myself that once believed in forever. But I wasn't that broken girl anymore. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes. As we stood outside the church that morning, greeting family, hugging old neighbors, I saw the car pull up. Melanie stepped out first. Still beautiful, still polished, still clinging to the illusion of perfection. Then she saw me, or more specifically, she saw Daniel. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. And for the first time in years, she looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. because standing next to me, holding my hand, was a man who radiated strength without arrogance. A man who didn't wear wealth like a badge but like a responsibility. A man who looked at me like I was his home. Her eyes flickered to my wedding ring. Her throat bobbed in a hard swallow. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Her silence said everything. The silence between Melanie and me hung in the churchyard like a thick fog. Her shock was almost poetic. For the first time in the 6 years since she'd gutted my life, she didn't have a comeback, a smirk, or a smug twinkle in her eye. Just silence. She blinked hard, the way someone does when they're trying not to cry, or trying to suppress rage. Daniel stood beside me, his presence calm and grounding. His hand in mine warm and steady. He wasn't flashy like Ethan. He didn't need to be. His strength was in the quiet way he loved me. And I think that's what unsettled Melanie the most. She could see I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And nothing made someone like her more uncomfortable than being confronted with the consequences of their actions. The funeral was quiet and dignified, just like Mom would have wanted. The church was filled with lilacs, her favorite. As the minister read psalms and spoke of heaven and peace, I tried to stay composed, but grief doesn't ask for permission. It hits when it wants. As I stepped up to deliver my eulogy, I caught Melanie's eyes from the front pew. Red, glossy, rimmed with guilt or exhaustion or both. I didn't know. I didn't care. My mother, I began, my voice trembling slightly, was a woman of grace. She believed in forgiveness, even when it seemed impossible. She believed in kindness, even when it wasn't returned. She taught me that strength isn't in how loudly you fight, it's in how you heal. I paused, my gaze drifting from the casket to the stained glass windows. She told me once when I was 12 that one day someone would break my heart, and when it happened I'd have two choices, to become bitter, or to become better. She said, "Claire, always choose better." I didn't understand what she meant back then. I looked down at my wedding ring and then out to the faces in the pews. But I do now. When I sat down, Daniel placed a gentle hand on my knee. Melanie didn't meet my gaze. She stared straight ahead, lips pressed tightly together. The wake was held at the family home, the same one where Melanie and I grew up. The same house where we used to play tag in the backyard and fall asleep on the living room carpet while watching VHS tapes. So many memories had been stained by betrayal, but today, they returned with aching clarity. People came and went with casseroles and awkward condolences. I smiled politely, made tea, answered the same questions about how I was doing and where I lived now. All while trying to hold myself together for Dad's sake. He looked 10 years older that day. Losing Mom had weathered him in ways I hadn't seen coming. Melanie stayed in the corner for most of it, talking to no one. She looked thinner, more hollow than I remembered. Her cheeks were sharper, and her posture didn't have the same commanding flair she once used to steal every room. When most of the guests had left, she wandered into the kitchen, where I stood washing dishes. "Do you need help?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. I just turned off the tap and dried my hands. She leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. "I wasn't sure you'd show." I looked at her, expressionless. It was Mom's funeral. Of course I showed. "I meant with him." She nodded toward the living room where Daniel sat with my dad, deep in conversation. "I didn't know that you were married. 3 years. She chewed the inside of her cheek. "He seems nice." "He is," I said simply. Silence again. Then she inhaled slowly, bracing herself like someone standing on a cliff's edge. "Can we talk?" I considered it. For years, I imagined this moment. Her finally coming to me, asking for forgiveness, confessing everything. And now that it was here, I wasn't sure if I wanted it. But I nodded, and we stepped out into the backyard, under the same oak tree we used to climb as kids. She sat on the wooden bench, and I stood. "I'm not here to defend what I did," she began. "I don't expect forgiveness, Claire. I just want you to know what really happened." I folded my arms. "You mean besides the part where you stole my fiancé?" Melanie winced. Yeah, that part. She stared at her hands for a long moment. I didn't plan it. Not at first. When I met Ethan, I was in a terrible place. My boyfriend had left me, I was drowning in debt, I hated my job. And then I saw your life, your apartment, your fiancé, your career, and I envied you. I always have. I said nothing. Her talk. I was so used to being second to you, she continued. In school, in Mom's eyes, in everything. When Ethan started giving me attention, I clung to it. Felt like I had finally won something. For once, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the one he wanted. But he was mine, I said coldly. He wasn't something to win. I know, she whispered. And he ruined me. That made me pause. What do you mean? She let out a bitter laugh. You were lucky he left when he did. You think I stole your life? No, Claire. I walked into a nightmare. Melanie looked up at me, her eyes red now. Ethan wasn't the man you thought he was. Or maybe he was, but you were too in love to see it. After you left, things were good for a while. Lavish trips, expensive gifts. But then, he changed. He became controlling, dismissive. I wasn't allowed to work. He criticized how I dressed, how I spoke. He cheated. Constantly. And he made sure I knew I could never leave him. My throat tightened. Why didn't you leave? She looked away. Because I had burned every bridge. No friends left. No family. Had no one. I was trapped in the life I thought I wanted. I sat down on the other end of the bench, still cautious, but listening now. We got married a year after you left. It wasn't a wedding, it was a deal. Something for his investors. I was his trophy. And I hated myself every single day. For what I did to you. For staying with him. For losing myself completely. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I left him 2 years ago. I moved into a studio apartment and started working at a consignment shop just to survive. I've been in therapy ever since. I've tried to rebuild, but no amount of work can undo what I did to you. For the first time, I saw not the sister who betrayed me, but the broken woman beneath the armor. You hurt me, I said quietly. You destroyed a part of me I'll never get back. But I believe you. She wiped her face, nodding. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said. But you do deserve a chance to become someone better. She smiled sadly. Mom would have wanted that. We sat there for a while, just two sisters in the shadow of an old oak tree. No longer enemies, not quite friends. Just two women trying to make sense of the damage they'd both survived. As the sun dipped behind the house, Melanie stood. Thank you for listening. I don't know if we can go back, I said. But I'm open to moving forward. She nodded. That's more than I deserve. And with that, she turned and walked inside. The days after the funeral passed in a strange, syrupy blur. Grief has a way of stretching time. Minutes feel like hours, yet entire days vanish without warning. I stayed at the family home for a few more nights, mostly for my father's sake. He didn't say it aloud, but I could see the weight in his shoulders, the way he kept checking the hallway like he expected Mom to turn the corner, humming softly the way she always had. The house was too quiet without her. Oh, hello. I spent most mornings in the sunroom with a cup of coffee and one of Mom's old shawls wrapped around my shoulders. She used to knit while sitting in that exact spot, legs tucked beneath her and a book on her lap she never quite finished. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to the cushions. It was like she had only just left the room. On the third morning, my father knocked softly on the doorframe, holding a small wooden box. It was the kind Mom used to store her letters and recipes, worn at the edges, brass clasp still shiny. She wanted you to have this, he said quietly, placing it in my hands. Told me not to give it to you until after. I opened the box slowly, fingers trembling slightly. Inside were old photographs, faded newspaper clippings, and folded letters held together with a pale blue ribbon. I lifted them out and saw my name on the first envelope, written in Mom's loopy cursive. Claire, to be opened when you're ready. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it open. Her handwriting filled the page, familiar and elegant, with little hearts over the eyes just like she always did. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I hate that. I hate not being able to hold your hand and tell you all this myself. But there are things I need to say, and I know you. You carry things deep in your heart even when you pretend not to. So please read this slowly. Let it sink in. First, I want you to know how deeply proud I am of you. Not just for your job or your strength, but for your kindness. Even after what happened with Melanie and Ethan, you held yourself with dignity. I watched you break and still managed to protect your heart from bitterness. That is a rare kind of courage. Now about your sister. Claire, I know you may not want to hear this, but please try. I saw what happened between you two. I saw the pain, the betrayal, the silence. I never told you this, but I once found Melanie crying in the kitchen, weeks after the wedding was called off. I asked her why, and she said, "Because I broke something I can't fix." I'm not defending what she did. Lord knows I was furious. But I also saw a girl who had lived her whole life feeling like she was in someone else's shadow. Your shadow. That doesn't excuse her choices. But I think it explains her shame. The world taught her to compete with you when she should have learned to walk beside you. And that's on me. I tried to love you both equally. But I see now how she craved the attention you earned so effortlessly. Maybe I should have spoken up more. Maybe I should have made space for both your stars to shine. I don't expect you to forgive her overnight. Or ever if that's your choice. But I hope you find a way to stop carrying the weight of her betrayal. Not for her but for you. Because your life, my darling girl, is too precious to be shaped by pain. Let go of the past only when you're ready. But never let it keep you from your joy. And know this. You were never second best. Not to anyone. Not even for a second. I love you beyond words. By the time I finished reading, my face was soaked with tears. I clutched the letter to my chest and just sobbed deep, heaving sobs that shook through my ribcage. It wasn't just the grief of losing her. It was the flood of emotions I had dammed up for so long. Rage, sadness, confusion. But under it all, there was clarity. That evening I pulled out the second letter in the box. It had Melanie's name on it. I debated what to do for hours, whether to call her, hand it over, or simply mail it and walk away. Part of me felt it wasn't my responsibility, but Mom wanted her to have it. And somewhere deep down, I knew it might be the beginning of something we both desperately needed. Truth. The next morning I called her. "Can we meet?" "Yes. Just for a few minutes." She sounded hesitant. "Of course. When?" "Now. At the park down the road." We met under a weeping willow, the one near the old wooden bench. She looked smaller today, like she hadn't slept, her eyes sunken and voice low. "I have something for you," I said, pulling the letter from my coat pocket. "From Mom." She took it with shaking hands, then sat and unfolded it. I didn't read over her shoulder. I just watched her expression shift as she read. First curiosity, then grief, then something else, shame maybe. Or regret. Or both. When she finished, she held it tightly like it was the last thing she had of Mom. "She wrote to me," she whispered. "She wrote to both of us." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Even after everything I did. She still loved me. She always did. She never stopped. We sat in silence after that. No arguments. No accusations. Just two sisters listening to the wind rustle through the trees. "I'm trying to be better," she said finally. "I really am. But I don't know if I can ever make it right." "Maybe it's not about making it right," I said. "Maybe it's about starting fresh." Melanie looked at me startled. "You'd give me that chance?" "I'm not saying we go back to how things were. That's not possible. But maybe we stop pretending we're enemies. Maybe we try something different." She gave a slow nod. "I'd like that." It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It wasn't a tear-filled hug or a movie scene with music swelling in the background. But it was real, honest, the kind of fragile beginning that only happens after both people have been through the fire. Later that day, I returned home to Daniel. He met me at the door, kissed my forehead, and held me without asking questions. That night, I told him everything. About the letter, the conversation with Melanie, and the strange sense of peace that followed. "You're amazing, you know," he whispered, brushing hair from my cheek. "I'm just tired of carrying it all." "Then let it go. You deserve lightness now." I nodded, curling into him on the couch. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The last morning I spent in my childhood home was quiet, still, and strangely peaceful. Dad had fallen asleep in the recliner with a photo album resting on his chest, flipping through old memories like a man searching for pieces of a time machine. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of herbal tea and looked out over the lawn. The same swing set Melanie and I once fought over was still there, rusted, barely usable, but standing. I'd packed most of my things, including Mom's letter, now folded carefully and stored in my suitcase. But one thing remained: the image of Melanie's face when she first saw Daniel at the funeral. That frozen expression wasn't just shock. It was realization. And maybe, just maybe, it was regret. Because when she saw Daniel standing beside me, hands gently resting on my back as I greeted family and friends, she realized something no diamond ring, no flashy car, no penthouse view could give her. She saw contentment, wholeness, and it terrified her. Because she finally understood that while she had spent years chasing validation, I had been quietly building something real. Something Ethan could never have given her. Something she could never steal. When Daniel and I returned to Chicago, it was like breathing fresh air after years in a smoke-filled room. Our brownstone, with its exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture, felt more like home than any penthouse I'd ever dreamed of living in. He made a pot of chili that night and insisted I do nothing but sit, relax, and grieve on my own terms. We talked late into the night. I told him everything, every detail I'd never said aloud. About the betrayal, the earring, the heartbreak of watching two people I loved become strangers in front of me. And he just listened. No pity, no judgments. Just arms around me and soft words like, "You didn't deserve that. And you're safe now." A few weeks later I returned to work. My marketing consultancy had grown into a full-fledged agency with a small but mighty team of creatives. I wasn't just the girl who had been betrayed anymore. I was a CEO, mentor, a woman who had survived the fire and used it to light a new path forward. It was during one particularly long strategy session that I got the text from Melanie. "Can I call you sometime? No pressure. Just want to talk." Took me a while to respond. But I did. Yes, not tonight. But soon. And I meant it. Healing, I've learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It's not a loud moment or a dramatic apology. Small steps, quiet choices, and above all, letting go of what you thought your life should look like, to embrace what it actually can become. 6 months passed. It was a Sunday morning. Spring had arrived, and the city was thawing. I stood barefoot in our kitchen, sipping coffee and watching Daniel flip pancakes while humming off-key to Marvin Gaye. "Do you ever think," I said suddenly, "about how crazy it is we met at that conference?" He turned, flipping a pancake perfectly mid-air. "I think about it all the time." I laughed. "I was crying in the hotel elevator. And I pretended not to see you, then left my business card anyway." "You were bold," I teased. I was smitten. Our life together wasn't a fairy tale. We argued sometimes. About dishes, weekend plans, how to load the dishwasher correctly. But it was real. It was built on something stronger than charm or chemistry. It was built on choice. Every day we chose each other. 2 weeks later, Melanie visited. She was in town for a work trip and asked if we could meet. We chose a quiet cafe near my office. I was nervous, but when I saw her walk in, hair tied back, no makeup, in jeans and sneakers, I realized I wasn't meeting the old Melanie. I was meeting someone new. Someone who had also rebuilt. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She told me she had officially divorced Ethan, moved to a smaller city, and was now working at a startup doing PR. She was in therapy. She had made new friends. She was starting over. And more than that, she was content being alone. I used to think I needed to be admired to feel valuable, she confessed, stirring her tea. Now I just want to like myself. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. Sometimes the unspoken spaces are enough. As we stood to leave, she hugged me, gently. No drama, no desperation. I hope one day we can be sisters again, she said. Smiled. Maybe we already are. In a new way. 1 year after Mom's funeral, I stood in a hospital room with Daniel holding our newborn daughter in his arms. We named her Eleanor. She had my nose and his eyes. Tiny fingers. Powerful cry. As I held her to my chest, I thought about everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights I thought I'd never feel whole again. And I realized this wasn't just healing. It was transformation. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you thought you wanted because it's preparing you for something even better. And no matter how deep the pain goes, it never gets the final word, you do. You write the ending. So to those of you watching this, maybe going through your own betrayal, heartbreak, or loss, know this: what someone stole from you does not define you. You can still build something beautiful. You can still find peace. You can still be happy. Perhaps not despite what happened, but because you chose to rise after it. So if this story moved you or reminded you of your own journey, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. We tell stories here not just for drama, but to remind you, you're not alone. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself. 'Cause no one can live your story the way you can.